afternoon, everybody. Uneducated Economist here. So in this video, we are going to be talking about one of Trump's tariffs dilemmas that he is going to be facing, and that is something that is called Triffin's paradox or Triffin's dilemma. And understanding how it is that the United States is able to maintain and be the world reserve currency, or at least the issuer of the world reserve currency, is not something that is easily done or can be easily maintained unless you are running trade deficits. Now, this is something that Robert Triffin had come to the understanding of back in like the 60s by watching how the gold standard was creating a situation in which that the demand for dollars was creating a value for dollars that far exceeded that of gold. Now, people at the time had taken the understanding that if they were holding dollars, they were holding something as good as gold. So if they were dealing gold or they were dealing in dollars, in their mind, they were essentially dealing with the exact same thing. But it wasn't the same thing, because there was far more dollars out there than there was gold to cover the dollar issuance that had happened. Now, what ended up taking place at that moment is that if the United States was to what ended up happening there was that the United States ended up being in a position in which that the demand for dollars was so big at the moment to do transactions that in order to continue to issue out the amount of dollars that were needed in order to cover the amount of transactions that were happening out there, the United States had to sever itself from the gold standard. And now a lot of times people will look at this and call it a conspiracy theory and all kinds of stuff that happened from there, the Nixon administration and stuff. And I'm not trying to deny all that stuff had happened. However, the economic forces that were taking place at the time was demanding a lot of dollars. There was a situation that the entire world had relied on the United States as far as being the issuer of that currency. Now, it got to that position because we were a manufacturing powerhouse. So to really take it back and understand what was happening is the United States was producing and selling the world's greatest products to the world, to the globe. And the world was sending us their money, which was gold at the time. Right? So now we were acquiring all this gold. And again, like, you can go back and say, oh, what about the war? What about, all these political events? All that stuff is happening too, right? But the bottom line of it is that the United States was selling stuff to the world, and the world was sending us their gold. We had acquired a lot of that gold, which denied the rest of the world the ability to hold that gold to do transactions with, because the United States was holding it. Now, the United States was in a position in which that they would have to relinquish that gold back out there to the rest of the world, because they didn't have any. And if we were to be in business, we would end up finding a situation in which that we would be buying the production of the nation outside of the United States and sending that gold out to the rest of the world. And this is the equilibrium that is typically found within all of history when it comes to economics. In fact, I left a link down in the description to a Financial Times article that was describing something from history very similar to this. Now, it was the situation that Portugal and England were having, in which that Portugal was selling a bunch of wine to England, and England was selling wool cloth to Portugal. Now, this was like a trade agreement that had happened between the two nations. Portugal was also seeking out like military protection and stuff like that. But what really the bottom line came down to is that Portugal was selling wine to England. England was selling wool to Portugal, but the difference between the two was quite extreme, in which that the amount of wool that Portugal was buying was far more than the wine that was being purchased by England. So now the gold is moving towards England from Portugal. Something interesting about this story is that Portugal was getting the gold from Brazil. So here they are getting it out of Brazil, then sending it up to England and getting this wool. Now, the amount of wool that they were bringing in, this wool cloth, was far more than what Portugal needed. Portugal was using that wool cloth to then trade down in Africa for slaves to take back over to Brazil to get the gold to bring back to Portugal to buy the wool from England in order to keep this trade going. So now, if you really think about this for just a minute, this is very, very much like the story of what Cantillon talks about as far as manufacturing base leaving or finding cheaper production or needing that of new money coming in order to maintain that of what is taking place within that economy. So Portugal, for example, needed ever increasing amounts of gold coming from Brazil. In order to get that gold from Brazil, they needed to get the wool from England in order to trade for slaves down in Africa to send back over to Brazil to get the gold. You see this triangle of situation that was happening? The moment that the gold turns off from Brazil, whether you deplete the mine or can't get the slaves or something, then now you have a situation in which that the wool can't be purchased from England. So now the wool industry up there is going to get hit. Also, not that it was a bad thing, but then the slave industry down in Africa is going to get damaged as well, considering that the wool wouldn't be going there. And again, because the slaves are no longer being taken from Africa and moved over to Brazil, the gold mine in Brazil is going to suffer the consequences from being depleted and not having that industry within itself. So all these industries begin to start to deplete. Now, this is the this is essentially like the simplest way to kind of understand how it is that this trade isn't free between the two, right? Like there's like, hey, we'll take as much wool, we'll take as much wine. But ultimately, it comes from the expectations of being able to continuously pull new money in from the Brazilian mine, right, in order to keep this whole thing moving. Well, here in the United States, we got something very similar. But our Brazilian mine is the issuance of U.S. debt. So now, again, if we are thinking about Portugal and that little story from like the 1600s, I think is when that took place. If we think about that same story, Portugal was getting gold in from Brazil. The United States, in that same situation, is getting new money in from the debt issuance. Now, the debt issuance, the U.S. Treasury bonds, those are being purchased by foreign entities out there. So the globe, all the rest of the sovereign nations and corporations and people outside of the United States, they're in demand of U.S. debt, of these U.S. bonds, because they are being used very similar to that of what gold was being used. So if you can imagine how gold was being used as a world reserve currency back prior to the Nixon administration, how gold was like the primary currency, everything was settled in gold. Now, if you take the U.S. treasuries, they are essentially what has replaced gold from back in the day. And now U.S. Treasury is the reserve currency. Even though it's dollars, I mean, essentially it's dollars. But when nations are doing transactions with each other, they're essentially doing it with dollars, but even more so, they're doing it with U.S. treasuries, because at least if you're holding U.S. treasuries, they are accepted or pretty much as liquid as you can get when it's getting close to the dollar position. U.S. treasuries are as close as you could possibly be. So a lot of times you will find that international transactions that don't even have anything to do with the United States are being done in U.S. treasury debt. So you can see, if you think about it in this fashion, U.S. treasuries or the U.S. bonds or U.S. debt assets, however you want to call it, has replaced what would have been gold back in the day when it comes to the world reserve currency and the transactions that were happening there. The dollar is now used in that place. Does all that kind of make sense? All right. Now here's the problem that Trump is going to face, or at least the idea of the dilemma that Trump is going to face if we are to bring manufacturing back to the United States. Now, if you are a world reserve currency and you are trying to get that currency out to the rest of the world, the easiest way to do that is by buying stuff. Like, you could just literally give it away. You can go through war efforts. You can do all this other stuff. But the most efficient, easiest way to get those dollars out there to the rest of the world is by buying their production, buying their stuff. Now, people might say, well, that's a bad deal. Maybe we shouldn't be buying their stuff. We should be making our own stuff. Well, that's cool. Like, I like the idea behind it. The only problem is that we simply do not manufacture enough stuff to support our standard of living. So we are forced to buy that of a foreign production in order to maintain our standard of living. If we lowered our standard of living, yeah, okay, now I agree that we could probably start manufacturing more for ourselves, but we're going to take a serious hit to our standard of living, and we are not going to enjoy our lives in that situation. It's pain and misery that we would suffer through in order to create that situation to be somewhat profitable, because what we have to do is manufacture in a way that is going to be competitive against the rest of the world. All right. Now, if we are not competitive against the rest of the world, we are not going to be able to sell our production to the world. It's going to stay domestic. Now, here's the problem with that is that if we are not sending dollars out to the world and we're keeping them domestic, those dollars are not making it out there to the rest of the world. The rest of the world is going to start suffering the consequences of not having enough dollars. They're going to suffer through a dollar shortage, right? Because again, if we are buying that of foreign production, we are exporting dollars. But if we are trying to reverse that and try to keep more manufacturing local, keep our purchases local, and not do as much deficit spending, or deficit trading, that's what I should say, deficit trading, then what we are going to end up facing is a situation in which that we are not buying that foreign production, but attempting to buy our own production. The only problem with that being is that new money comes in through that of debt issuance, meaning that we have to have the nations outside of the United States buying our debt in order to increase the amount of new money within the system. Okay? Without that new money, we're going to end up suffering with pain and misery, right? As the separation between the rich and the poor grows worse, and the lower half suffers with a lower standard of living. This is the problem that they're going to end up facing. So again, when we think about what it is that's going to happen to the dollar, if the United States was to slow down on the trade deficit, like not get as much dollars out there through the purchasing of foreign production, if we go through that situation, there's going to be less dollars available out there for the globe. Now, if the world is in demand of dollars and there's less of them available, the dollar begins to strengthen. If the dollar strengthens, our exports here in the United States gets damaged because of that. The foreigners will not be able to buy as much production from the United States because the dollar strengthens. And again, we have to think about this for just a minute. If there is less dollars leaving the United States because there's less trade deficit happening, right? So less dollars being exported, less foreign production coming in, less dollars moving out of the United States is going to increase the demand for dollars. Because if there's less of them going out of the United States, that doesn't relieve the pressure that is going to exist outside of the United States from all the dollar-denominated debt that has been created. So again, to understand that nations, corporations, individual people have written debts that are due in dollars that have nothing to do with the United States. Not our government, not our corporations, not our banks, not our people, nothing, right? But these are debts that are due in dollars that exist outside of the United States. And if the United States is not exporting dollars through a trade deficit, meaning that we're importing stuff and exporting dollars, if we are not doing that, which is essentially what the Trump administration is pushing to do, then less dollars moving out of the United States will strengthen the dollar, and this is going to make it very difficult on our exporters. Anybody who is exporting stuff out of the United States over to a foreign nation will suffer the consequences from this. Okay? This is the dilemma. How do you can't fix this? You have to understand that being a world reserve currency and being the issuer of a world reserve currency and continuously being the custodian of a world reserve currency means you will have to run trade deficits. Meaning you have to import more than you export, because when you import stuff, you export dollars. And by exporting the dollars, you get the dollars out there to the world and meet the world's demand for dollars. If you don't meet the world's demand for dollars, the dollar strengthens and your exporters get screwed. So once you have made it to this point where you are no longer a producer saver, but instead a debtor consumer, you have moved past the point of no return. Right? Because returning back to being a producer saver again means you're going to suffer the consequences of a much lower standard of living, because now you have to compete against somebody who's going to go sleep on the dirt and produce the same thing that you're doing. And you're living in a house and driving a car, talking on a cell phone and drinking beer. Right? But your life is going to have to compete against somebody who has none of that stuff in their life. And you're not going to be able to compete. That's just the bottom line. And so when you put all this idea that you're going to bring good manufacturing jobs back to the United States, yeah, with ever increasing amounts of tariffs and ever increasing amounts of subsidies, because the underlying economic force simply says that's not allowed. And the moment that you stop with the government interference, it all unwinds. All these nations out there who are producing the same things that the United States wants to produce, and they get hit with a tariff, the moment that the government backs away from their ever-increasing amounts of effort to try and maintain the situation, the moment that they back away from it, you lose your job. Think about how fragile of a situation that is creating. Right? Again, this is the dilemma. What are you supposed to do about it? There's nothing you can do but understand the situation and in the position that you are taken within it. Having a good manufacturing job in the United States is very important, but if your good manufacturing job that you have here in the United States only exists because there's ever increasing amounts of tariffs and subsidies that are keeping your job here, think about how fragile of a situation that really is. All right. 16 minutes into this, you're for real, you have that wrong. All right, Randall, you must love government handouts. All right, Jonathan says the only people who aren't going to suffer as a result of these insane policies are the rich. Everyone else is going to get poorer. Yeah, Jonathan, but I disagree that the only people who are going to suffer are results of this are the insane, like from these insane policies. I don't agree with that. There are going to be many people who are poor who do not understand this, who are going to suffer immensely because of it. And yes, the rich people will probably do very well from it because the inequality is going to continue to grow. However, it doesn't mean that you can't take a position that is going to benefit you because of it. Right? Now, what that is, you have to figure out, because every single person's life is different. Like me, what I'm going to do and the position that I am taking is going to be far different from what it is that you're going to do. Right? I don't know what it is that you have in your life. I don't know what debts you have incurred. I don't know what assets you have. But once you have figured that out and understand what's going on within the system, you can definitely position yourself so that you can take advantage of it. What it is you need to do, you need to figure that part out. Right? But understanding what's happening and why it's happening is key to this. Like, without that part of it, then you're going to be left up to, like, you know, all the chaotic conspiracies and propagandized information and all that. Okay? All right, cruising down here a little ways, we got Walrus with some of my DC government friends are very worried about their jobs. Yeah, I would be too. And again, right, relying on government to create a situation in which that you have a job is not, it's not something that is going to be, what should I say, secure, you know? Like, government doesn't provide security at all, right? They promise that security, but you have to give up your freedom. So here it is, you got this good government job, or at least you think you do, but then you don't, because the government's just going to hack it out of there saying, hey, we don't need you anymore, right? Being in a position in which that, you know, if you are a business owner, you may end up suffering the consequences from having an economic environment that is no longer conducive to the way you do business, but you can change the way you do business. You can't change government. Like, you can try. You know? I mean, we try to change government all the time. This is what we voted for, and this is what you get. I mean, to me, I don't think it's good or bad or ugly. It's just what it is, so I have to deal with the situation as I see it. You know? All right. My dad worked 32 years in glass factory, made a good living. The private sector doesn't provide security either. Absolutely not. You're so right about that. Right? But if you are an individual who is using their skills that they have acquired throughout their life to try and figure out how to earn money, you can adapt to the situation. It's very difficult to make the government adapt to you. right? Once you have taken that government job, then that's it, man. Like, either you could take a different job, but you can't make government do what it is that is suiting to your life. If you have a business, or if you're, got side hustles and a regular job and all this other stuff, you can adapt to the situation as best you can. Maybe you can take on more side hustles or figure out that business or doing something else. But generally, most people who have a good government job are not thinking in that fashion, like trying to figure out how to run a business or doing something else. They're just relying on their government job and all the benefits that they get from it. So again, that's like, it's everybody each their own, I mean, my dad, my old man, he was in the Coast Guard my entire life until I was like in high school, and then he took a job at the state parks. So for 20 something years he worked for the Coast Guard, another 20 years he worked for the state parks. He literally had those two jobs my entire life. Government jobs, right? That's the way he looked at life. That's what he did. He had no stress, no worries, paid his bills on time, had a retirement at the end of it. I mean, it worked out perfect for him, right? All right, what are the chances they change the financial system altogether to fit the new manufacturing tariffs approach? They can't. You can't change, I think this is a lot of times people just misunderstand or believe that the financial system has been designed in a way that, like, some guy was just like, okay, so here's a financial system. There you go. It evolved into what it is today, right? So you can't necessarily change it. You can, adapt to the new situations and try to create new ways of doing things, but ultimately this is an evolving process here. It's not like somebody can just write it down and say, hey, let's change it and make it this now, right? So that's not true, Carl. I believe in innovation and was the best at this. Okay. There's always work. I worked at a company that laid almost everybody off, but because I worked harder and cheaper, I was one of the few people that they kept. Believe all you want, they won't make it so. Dingbat, the camera reverses the image. Yeah, that's right, Brody. I mean, I switch it on my camera. Like, my camera itself is set the other way, but something about the YouTube app itself, when I go live, it flips the image around. So I can't seem to fix it. And it was last time I did an update to the app that it did this, and I can't seem to figure out how to turn it around. All right. I think people targeted the federal government for all their problems too much. Do people not realize that they have a state government? I believe that the state government has more to do with your quality of life. And I believe that it's the property owners themselves within that area that are creating it. I don't think it's the government itself. The government is a reflection of what it is that the people are desiring and asking for in their particular area. One of the things that I'm facing here in my local area is that the demographics of the people is definitely changing. When I grew up here in Astoria, was a working class town. We had loggers and fishermen, and that's where most of the new money came in from, was from the logging and fishing community. Now we got a huge hospital district. We got a massively growing retirement community, probably based around that growing hospital district, and medical facilities that are popping up around here. And we got a whole bunch of new remote workers that are now living in our area because Portland sucks. So they moved out to Astoria area, where they can find a much cleaner, happier, friendlier environment that's actually somewhat cheaper than the Portland area. So now we have this huge difference in the demographics of people. Now these people, their wants, their desires, what it is that they feel is their whatever conveniences, however you want to look at it, what they desire, what their preferences are, is the reflection that we are now seeing within our community here. So we have now a lot of trendy restaurants. We have, touristy kind of like stuff that's happening here, much more in the way of generating like fun and relaxation and entertainment and stuff like that. Well, when I was a kid, this town wasn't really like that. The bars were divey, working class bars. There was a couple of nice places, but for the most part, that's what they were. It was like the working class people, the locals, that's what they You know, that's what they preferred, so that's the bars that existed around here. Well, now we have trendy people with money and retirement money and hospital district money, and so these people want a funner, trendier, nicer place to go hang out. And the dive bars, you know, there's a couple of them left, but for the most part, those dive bars are disappearing and the fancier places are coming in. Now, this is just a small example of the many things that are happening within our area. But again, this doesn't have to do with our local government. This has to do with the desires, the wants, and, you know, the preferences of the people themselves who are now in our area. And this is the same thing that's going to happen no matter what area you're in. Now, you can blame it on the government itself, but the government is a reflection of the people themselves. So the people in the reaction, in the desires, in the actions that they take within their local area is the reflection that you are now seeing. If you don't like it, look at the property owners, because they're the ones who are creating that situation, including the homeless. All right, that's all down to the property owner's responsibility. Dive bars way better in my opinion. I absolutely agree, Barney. I wouldn't, like, I mean, I've been to the other little trendy bars and stuff, and they're nice and they're fun to hang out at and stuff like that, but like, the dive bars are my home. That's where the darker, the more it smells like stale cigarettes, like, you know, dirty, greasy kind of, that's my kind of place right there, you know. All right, you will be the new Portland in the future. I don't doubt that, M Rider 7777. I do not doubt that at all. This is very much starting to happen in that fashion, because what people are seeing here now in Astoria was the same awesomeness that they saw in Portland 10, 15, 20 years ago, right? Nice, friendly, clean, beautiful, awesome place to be, which was fairly, you know, I mean, comparatively to some areas, fairly inexpensive. Now it's super expensive. Nobody can afford to live there. You got this huge separation between the rich and the poor. The rich people are throwing money like crazy at the homeless, trying to figure out how to get them out of their sight. It makes the problem even worse, you know. So yeah, I can see where Astoria is eventually going to get into that same situation, in which that it is so expensive to live around here that the average working class job just can't cut it anymore, and you'll find a lot of people who are they're in that position, very frustrated with the situation. Yeah, I could very much see that happening. Now, how long down the road that takes, who knows? But at that moment, like, I have to think, I'm a property owner in this area. I can only assume that the property value is going to do very well, right? Considering everything that's happening here. It wasn't easy to buy a house here, but buying a house here, I think, was probably one of the smartest things that I could ever have done, considering that at the time, I didn't think it was. Like, I very much disagreed with the idea of buying a house being a good idea, only to find out that the house value just absolutely went through the roof. And it was probably one of the smartest decisions I ever made. People say all the time, man, you flip-flopped on the housing market. It was like, no, I didn't flip-flop on the housing market. What happened was I thought that the housing market was going to crash after interest rates went up. Interest rates went up and the housing market went up, and I realized, man, there was something wrong with the way that I was looking at this. So I didn't flip-flop. I changed the way that I was understanding it to understand why it is that I was wrong about it in the first place. I thought for sure after I bought my house that it would lose value. I thought for sure. I knew it. I mentally prepared for the going underwater, only to find that it did exactly the opposite of that and shot through the roof. And I thought to myself, man, I cannot even buy in the same town that I grew up in, that I work in. Here it is 3 years later, and there's not a single place that I could buy right now that I could afford. If it wasn't for the fact that I bought the house at the time that I did, I would have to leave my town today. Isn't that strange? Crazy, right? Okay, what time is it? Alrighty, guys, I got a few more minutes here. This sort of division is nothing new in the world. No, you're absolutely right. So don't get mad at it. I'm not mad at it. Or fight it. That's right. I absolutely agree. You can't win, so use it to your advantage and literally profit from it, or you will only lose. I so agree, Carl. Man, you and I are on the same page, bro. Alright, trapped in your own house? Absolutely not. It's the best to admit wrong for the sake of changing one's mind and being right. So true, All-Nighter. I mean, I think that a lot of people are on the same understanding that I was, that just the simple, like, just intuitively, logically, just say it out loud. When interest rates go up, people will not be able to afford the higher priced homes, and you'll have to bring the price down in order to meet the capability of the buyer. That makes sense. Like, you just say it outright, it makes sense. But that's not what happened, right? That's not what happened. So you can say it, even today, say it make sense by saying it, but the reality is saying something much different, right? So our logical brain doesn't work when it comes to understanding what has taken place within this economy when we say stuff like interest rates go up, prices will come down. Yes, it makes sense. Saying it outright does. But then when you start diving deeper into the situation to understand why it is that that statement is wrong, it opens up a whole new view to look at, to understand that the market perception over things, the way that the communication is coming from the Federal Reserve, the expectations of government actions has a huge, profound impact on the psychology of the buyer itself. Right? Now, understanding that they have switched the way that they conduct themselves with monetary policy and the delivery of information so that they can then literally use the mind control aspect, the psyops operation to control the outcome. Like, this is crazy to think, but once they had switched to that sort of like tool to conduct themselves, the old way of understanding it doesn't work anymore. So interest rate adjustments and the way that we used to understand it doesn't function like it used to. So to understand interest rates and going up and down will have this sort of reaction on asset prices, it doesn't work anymore. You have to set that stuff aside. And even the Federal Reserve has communicated this. Like, just the recent speech coming from Philip Jefferson, even in that recent speech that he had given, he even had, like it said right in the speech, that the market is listening for specific sentences coming from the Federal Reserve that would adjust the asset prices. The Fed knows this. They know the specific sentences that the markets are looking for in order to adjust the asset prices. Like, the Fed is aware of this. It doesn't have anything to do with interest rate adjustments. So once you see that, once you recognize it, it's complicated, it's deep. Like, we study this with the credible threat theory all the time. Like, if you want this information as far as the credible threat theory and how to understand how monetary policy is really affecting the markets, you have to join the channel. You have to join the channel and go over the member-only live streams that we have done, breaking down the Fed's speeches in the monetary policy in a way that nobody else has done. Nobody else on the internet. There is not a single article. There's not a place that you can go to. There's no other videos. There's no other channel that is going to break down monetary policy the way that I have done it. I have gone back 20 plus years to pull speeches out that then define and describe the credible threat theory in detail all the way up to this exact moment that we are now facing, that proves that they are using the mainstream media propagandized information as a psychological operation to conduct themselves because they know that the interest rate adjustments no longer works. I am the only one who talks about this. I don't know why. I wish the other people out there would pick up on this information, because I know that if they were to research the stuff that I have done, that they would be able to deliver the information a hell of a lot better than I can, because I'm just some dude sitting in an S10 breaking this information down from a working class position. There's no reason for this. The mainstream media has propagandized this information to deliver it to you, to confuse the hell out of the people so that they can use their words to guide the markets. And it's working. It so works. I mean, just think about it right now. I'm already reading about how there's like exemptions to the tariffs. Like, the auto industry is already questionable on whether or not there's going to be all these massive tariffs on the auto industry. Like, all these questions are now starting to arise. And I said this. I said, we really have to see to what level these tariffs are really going to impact the economy, because how many exemptions, how many workarounds are there going to be after these tariffs are inflicted? Right? Because people have this assumption that, like, oh man, there's nothing that can be done about it, so therefore it will be forced to happen. I very much disagree with that. You inflict this and you're going to find people starting to change their behaviors in the way it is that they are going to conduct themselves to try and avoid those tariffs. And they will figure it out. Alrighty, guys, I would love to keep hanging out, but I gotta go. Uneducated Economist, you guys let me know. Let me see, what time is it? I'll read one more comment here. I'll read one more. Hey, let me got Kirk. Yes, they say 100%, but they know they only get 10%. That's negotiating. The art of the deal. Okay, M Rider 777. I've been priced out of my own town. I think I'm gonna go overseas. And I guess I'm priced out of the country if I don't join the 1%. I somewhat agree with you, but I think that there's places in this nation that you could probably still find a fairly inexpensive home. The problem with it is that those places are probably not really like awesome for wages and income and stuff like that. So thanks, Simon, and everyone. Thank you, All Nighter. Leave it up to the experts. You guys are awesome. One more for All Nighter. May you all be well humped on this hump day. Good one, All Nighter. All right. Oh, gotta read Brody's. And thanks everyone for giving me and All Nighter such an easy time. Yeah, thank you guys for doing the moderation for the channel and you know, taking care of the issues with the spammers and those trolls out there, at least making sure that they behave so that the algorithm doesn't find that some of the comments, because this is the problem, like even within the comments, if you find hateful speech and stuff like that, the algorithm doesn't want to spread the video around. So, you know, showing the love inside of there, like it says, love it. See you, Brody. You guys are awesome.